So what is blockchain technology? If you break down the word, it is a chain of blocks. What does that mean? It's basically a list of things that happens. So the word ledger is essentially a list, and a blockchain is also known as a distributed ledger, which means it's a ledger that is distributed in many places. Or in other words, like a list that many people have. So like, for example, the fact that this happened, that David was here today and talked about this at like 3:09 p.m. Costa Rica time, and that you were all in the room, like you all can independently verify this thing that just happened or is happening right now, and write it down on your list of things that happened this week. And then you guys all go to different parts of the world and you have this list, and we can all verify that this activity happened, right? And maybe we even take a picture and upload it onto the internet and timestamp it. And so that is basically a way that something can be validated, like this thing happened, and no one can tamper the list, because if one person changes like the date or something, everyone else has the copy of the list, right? You guys all know that it happened, so it's more difficult to change. And like, when is this useful? So I'll get into that in a bit, but basically it's just a list of things that happened at the very basic level. And this isn't a new thing. So in the 8th century in the Middle East, there was developed a system called Hawala, which is basically like, I think probably the first like real global remittance network for moving money across long distances. And basically this is the way it worked. You had a guy over here in Mecca and a guy over here in Medina, right? And the guy in Mecca wants to transfer like 20 bars of gold to the guy in Medina, right? But they don't actually want to move it across because there's like bandits and Bedouins and the gold might get stolen, right? So what they want to do is like just transfer it. So the way this worked is there's money changers like that hold the gold in Mecca and then in Medina. And the Mecca money changer receives the gold and then sends a horseman, like rapidly goes to Medina, and then tells the guy's buddy, transfer the gold to here. So actually, like, no one has to move gold across, or money or whatever, across distances, but the money is exchanged. Do you guys see how that works? So basically, the reason this relates to a ledger is that both of these money changers keep a copy of the transaction, right? So they have the list of transactions and they can validate it. Like, they can come together and look at the list and be like, yep, all of these things happened, and we have multiple versions that are tracking this list of transactions. So basically, a blockchain is a really, it's like an evolution on this same thing that's been around since the 8th century in the Middle East and is still in use today. And the first blockchain is called the Bitcoin blockchain. There's now many of them, and that was the first one, so I'll talk a little bit about that one. So again, a blockchain is basically a list of things that happened. In case of the Bitcoin blockchain, it's a list of transactions. It's like a list of people sending Bitcoin from one address to the next. And it's difficult to separate blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, although they're two different things, and keep them separate in your mind. So blockchain technology is basically this distributed ledger. It's just like a list of things that happen that many people have a copy of the list. So like, you could have a copy in Italy or Spain, we could have a copy in the US, we could have a copy in Colombia, and thousands of other copies. And every time someone makes a transaction, all of the list gets updated on every node around the world. And that makes it really difficult to corrupt. It also makes it really difficult for any nation state to turn it off or disable it. So it's basically what they call financial censorship resistant. So it means that it's really difficult to stop people from the financial freedom of sending money to each other. And I'll give you an example of when that becomes important in a minute. The main difference between cryptocurrency and blockchain is that a blockchain is a list, so it's a list of things that happened, and then a cryptocurrency is a currency, just like US dollars or the euro or any other currency, with the difference that it runs on top of a blockchain. And it's not, it's generally not a central bank or government currency, although now there are government cryptocurrencies. I think Venezuela did the first one. I might be wrong about that, but they have one called the Petro. Russia and China are both working on government cryptocurrencies. Singapore might be, I believe. And there's a few other countries right now. So basically, a cryptocurrency is a currency that essentially uses blockchain technology as the primary form of moving it around. Also, you can think about this, so the Bitcoin blockchain is basically a list. It's like this huge file. It's open source software that any of you can run on your computer. You can run a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain and help confirm transactions and make the network more secure. And then there's a cryptocurrency that's called Bitcoin that runs on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So like the Bitcoin blockchain can only run one currency. Actually, now it's evolving and they're starting to be able to do some pretty interesting stuff. But pretty much it only runs one currency, which is called Bitcoin. There's a newer blockchain, Ethereum, that runs an infinite amount of currencies on top of it. So for example, the Cosmic Convergence Festival has a coin that's called Cosmic Coin, and it runs on top of Ethereum. And any of you guys can create a coin and run it on top of Ethereum, which means that the Ethereum blockchain is separate from the currency, which is called Ether in this case. So that's a little bit about the difference. So you can have blockchain technology without a cryptocurrency on top of it. But to have a cryptocurrency, I think pretty much you always have a blockchain underneath it. Yeah. Keep going. All right, so a little bit of history. So there's a lot of attempts at digital money and digital gold, like before Bitcoin in the 90s and early 2000s. But the innovation was really this distributed ledger, and it was also a way to prevent something that's called double spending, which is basically when someone spends some money and then spends it again, which was always a problem that was a difficult one to figure out how to solve. And the Bitcoin came to being in 2008. It was originated by an anonymous programmer or group of programmers that go by the name Satoshi Nakamoto. The identity of this person or these people has never been discovered, which is pretty interesting. And it was a reaction to the 2008 financial crisis. So it basically was this solution proposed by someone or a group of people that tried to fix and address the kind of excesses of the current monetary and banking system and the abuses that led to the 2008 financial crisis. So that's part of the origin. And as I mentioned, Bitcoin is the first blockchain, so it's really important to talk about its history. And it's a blockchain and it's a cryptocurrency. So you can think of like PayPal is a platform or a network, and it's running US dollars on top of it, it's running euro, right? And it's interesting because Bitcoin is both a platform and a currency, right? It's both. In order to move currency across the Bitcoin blockchain, you need a little amount of Bitcoin. So like, if I wanted to send 1 Bitcoin to Phil, which is like $4,000 today, I would need a little tiny amount of Bitcoin to fund the transaction. That would be like, let's say a quarter, right? 25 cents. And that 25 cents gets distributed to all of the miners or all of the people that are running the nodes. And there's no company behind Bitcoin. It's just a bunch of people like us running nodes, like running the software on their computers. And let's see. So yeah, it's different than PayPal because PayPal is a regulated platform that is run by a company. It's registered in a country, and the Bitcoin blockchain is kind of the first real digital financial system that runs pretty much outside of the existing monetary infrastructure. And that's where the censorship resistance comes in, which I'll get to in a minute. But first I'll talk about Ethereum. So Bitcoin was the first blockchain. Ethereum was, 6 years later. There was some other stuff in between, but this was the next big project. And Ethereum is different in a couple ways. One is that it can run any amount of currencies, and any one of us can launch a new currency on Ethereum in a few minutes with a few clicks. And that means that everyone in the world now has the power to create their own money in their own bank, which is pretty revolutionary. And you need a little bit of Ether to transfer. Ether is the name of the currency that you use to pay for the Ethereum blockchain. And you can think of it like toll roads. Like here in Costa Rica, there's roads where you drive and you pay money to use the road. So the blockchain is similar. So you pay a little bit of Ether every time you need to do something on the Ethereum blockchain. So if I wanted to move my own currency across from one person to another, then I would pay a tiny amount of Ether, let's say like 3 cents to make a transaction. The other big difference is that Ethereum is what's called a smart contract platform. And basically, you guys have all used smart contracts, whether you know it or not. I'll give you an example. So who took Uber here to get here? Okay, so when you click accept voyage or accept the trip in your Uber, you're basically entering into what's called a smart contract with the driver, where both of you have agreed that whatever the results of the car drive is, there will be a payment from you to the driver, and neither of you know what it is yet, because there's some variables like the traffic, how much time it will take, what time of day it is, etc. And Uber has its smart contract, which is basically self-executing contract that's run by code. So there's a few lines of code, and the Uber application basically calculates what the final cost of the car ride is, and that's a smart contract. So with Ethereum, you can actually make smart contracts, which is pretty revolutionary because it also means you can run an app like Uber on top of Ethereum without a company called Uber. So any of us could write a smart contract and run it on Ethereum, and it could be pretty close to zero commissions. You would need like a tiny bit of Ether to make the smart contract run, but you wouldn't need a company behind it. And so it's like can open up the possibility of near zero commission business models for Uber, Airbnb, like any marketplace platform. The other really interesting thing is once it's running on Ethereum, it's also very difficult for any nation state to regulate. So once it's running on the blockchain, it's very difficult to censor. It's difficult for, it's distributed, right? There's no central point of failure. There's no company to go to, etc. So this is where some kind of like extreme version of libertarian capitalists get really excited about the possibilities, like an app that we might launch shortly. So that's like a little bit about Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I'll pause again here for questions, if you guys have any. Yeah? All right, so we'll keep going.
I do have a question. I'm just trying to organize like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just use like layman terms.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is like you have the internet, and I'm just not sure like who's like kind of delegating this or like just making sure it's like kind of in order. So when you buy that currency and it turns into bitcoins, and then it goes, and then the way you kind of like monitor like where the money's going is there's a list of people who are kind of putting in their money in this, and then if there's trading happening, it shows up on the list so that you can look at it and see like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I guess I'm curious about is when you put your money in and then and it converts, where does like the cash go? Like,
right.
Like, and then it's like, because it sounds like there's nodes,
Mm-hmm.
like, and that's like the employees kind of working.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
like.
Okay, so the question is around the exchange of currencies and like the interface between different currencies and how the fees get distributed. And let's see, so we'll start with me. Say I want to buy some Bitcoin and I have US dollars or another currency. So there's two kinds of exchanges. There's one that's called like fiat to crypto, where you can exchange government currencies for cryptocurrencies, and then there's another that's crypto to crypto, and some exchanges are both. And so I can go and connect my bank account or credit card to an exchange and buy cryptocurrency from the exchange, so basically on an exchange there's a bunch of buy orders and sell orders from people around the world, and like I can set a buy order at a certain price. Like if Bitcoin goes to $3,500, then I'll buy some amount of it, let's say $100 of it.
Yeah.
So you can think of Bitcoin as a stock, just like Google stock or Apple stock. It's basically, at this point, like it was intended to be a currency, but at this point it's more of a speculative investment vehicle and a store of value. So the biggest, I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but let's say one of the largest places where Bitcoin is in use today is Venezuela. And the reason is that the currency of Venezuela is losing value by like, let's say 90% a day. Like what, you have $1,000 in your bank account today, tomorrow it's $100. The next day it will be like $5. The next day it will be like 30 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people in Venezuela are converting all of their money into Bitcoin to keep against inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned exchanges, which is one way of trading. You can also come to a money changer. Have you seen like at a border here in Central America where there's someone like changing dollars for colones or quetzales or at the airport?
At the airport.
At the airport.
Yeah.
So imagine that at the same airport, there's also Bitcoin. It's one of the options. And probably we'll see this in the next year or two, where you'll see Bitcoin exchangers. So there's also Bitcoin ATMs in San Jose, Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if I'm really afraid that the US dollar or the colon will lose a bunch of value, I can just trade it for Bitcoin. And so basically, you can think of it just like another currency, but it's not physical, it's fully digital.
Yeah.
Just like PayPal, right? It goes into your wallet account.
It's because like, where is it going? Like,
where is the cash going?
Yeah, because when you utilize, like, it's like, I get Venezuela, like they're switching because they want to try to avoid inflation. However, we have inflation because that's part of our economic, like, it's just part of our capitalism. Like, it goes up and down based off of current exchanges. So I just, like, I don't get how, like, where is it going?
So
like
let's say I have $100, and then you have Bitcoin. I'll give you the $100, and then you send me the Bitcoin. So it's basically like person to person.
Okay.
So it's just this global network of human beings that.
So in a way, you're creating your own like capitalism. It's not even. I don't even know if it's called. It's just in between people. Yeah.
You could call it like peer-to-peer capitalism.
It's taking out like companies.
Yeah, banks are no longer kind of as relevant in this system. So like there's a lot of people hypothesizing that in the future there won't be banks, or that everyone will be our own bank. Like everyone can create a currency and everyone can be a bank, and that there won't be central banks with their own currencies. That's another hypothesis, that there will only be cryptocurrencies and that government currencies will stop existing. I don't think that's true, because already China and Russia are making their own government cryptocurrencies to compete with the private cryptocurrencies or decentralized cryptocurrencies. So there's that will be interesting to see. But you can think about there's like another way to think about it, where this is called like the moonshot, where there's a scenario where Bitcoin becomes the global currency. Like today, the US dollar is the global reserve currency, and a big part of the reason is that most countries with oil reserves accept the US dollar as their oil reserve currency, and that has a lot to do with what's happening right now in Venezuela. But if Venezuela or Russia or Iraq or another country with a lot of oil, or Iran, started accepting Bitcoin as their reserve currency for oil, then overnight the value of Bitcoin would increase a lot. And what would happen is that money is basically a fiction, right? In the end, it's like this piece of paper that we collectively hallucinate that it has value, right?
We value it, yeah.
Yeah, but like there isn't any inherent value to it, if that makes sense. Like it's not backed by gold like it used to be. The US dollar is kind of backed by oil as long as countries keep accepting it for oil, which might stop happening soon, who knows. And Bitcoin is the same. It's this like collective hallucination that has value because we say it has value, because that's like how money works, right? Like it is this like idea, this like fiction that we all believe in. And so if Bitcoin becomes the global money supply, the fiction that we all believe in, then overnight it, like all of this money that's currently in government money, in like pieces of paper that people feel has value, will go into the it's like there's two different financial systems, right? There's like the government, the financial system of the governments, and then there's this new one. And more money is flowing into the new financial system. And there's people hypothesizing that in 10 years from now, the system will be like 100 times more money flowing through it than it is today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just I think a lot is coming up for me, and it's just because like based off of what I know about the world and capitalism and how I like understand money, it's just I don't know, a lot's coming up, like a lot of different. It's kind of more like rebuttals in a way. So so I don't want it to be just a thing between me and you. So
Yeah, we can come back.
Yeah.
We'll go through it and then come back to it. Okay, so next thing we can talk about is use cases. So use cases for blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. There's a lot of hypothetical use cases that people are like speculating on and betting on and like hypothesizing on, but I'm just going to talk about the real use cases in 2019 that are happening today. So one of them is this is the way I got into cryptocurrency. It's basically paying employees in other countries or making remittance in other countries or a microtransaction. So these are like three different things that are all kind of related. So the way that I got into Bitcoin is basically I was trying to pay a graphic designer in Guatemala and actually here in Costa Rica. And it was like a pretty small sum, like $100. And I was looking at all the different options. There was, PayPal didn't work because PayPal is not really integrated with these countries. Western Union could have worked, so I could go and pay like 10 or 20 bucks. Go into a branch, like walk out of my house and go into a Western Union branch, take like an hour of my time and pay like 20 bucks. And then the other 80 bucks gets there, right? It's like a 20% commission. I could also do a wire transfer from my bank, which costs maybe $30, and then on the other side, because the wire transfer charges you on two sides, another $15, and that takes about a week usually internationally. So that would take 1 week and about 50%, right? So these are the options I found, and then someone recommended, oh, you should try Bitcoin. It's like email for money, right? You send an email, and the email gets to the other side, and then the money's in their account. So I tried it, and I sent $100, and she received $99.75. So it was like 0.25% transaction, right? And it took about 30 minutes to get there. The transaction took about 30 minutes to confirm. It's not instant yet, but it's getting faster and faster. So it was like way faster, way cheaper, and way easier. Like I didn't have to leave my house and go into Western Union and talk about that. So that was how I got into it. It was just like, and the same thing applies to like remittances. So like the biggest remittance corridor for Bitcoin today is from Colombia to Venezuela. And I think that's the biggest one. It's getting more and more every day. And basically that's people in Colombia sending money to their families in Venezuela in a form of money that will more or less hold value the next day. And there's something in Venezuela happening right now called hyperinflation, which is like pretty unique. I mean, it happens like once in a while, but it's pretty rare. And it's totally different from like 2%, 3% a year. It's like 1,000% per day, right? It could be like if you were a millionaire in Venezuela 10 years ago, your money is worth like a cent or two. Now it's pretty crazy. And the other thing is that it's really difficult for people to send money to their families in Venezuela using the Venezuelan banking system because Venezuela is currently sanctioned by a lot of countries. And so there are kind of blocks on the international banking corridor, so it's really difficult for people to get money to their families. So even in a normal situation from like U.S. to Mexico, it's still great to send remittances of like $20, $30, because if you use Western Union, that's the fee, right? But if you use Bitcoin, it's a few cents, and so it's really good for like small amounts of remittances. And then there's another thing called microtransactions, which are like, let's call them sub $1 transactions. So every time you guys use Visa, there's usually like a 3% charge to the merchant, but also a 30-cent fee. And Stripe is the same, and I think this is pretty universal. So if you're a merchant and you're accepting like a $1 payment, you're actually only going to get like 70 cents. And so most goods are not $1 today. That's like not that relevant. But there's a really interesting case that's becoming bigger and bigger, which is machine-to-machine economy. And you can imagine like, I won't go too deep into the Internet of Things, but here's a little like weird scenario that's happening right now. So there's lots of machines communicating with each other and exchanging data, exchanging information, and this is happening all the time, right? And there are many like micro exchanges from one machine to another for like a tiny piece of information or a tiny piece of data, or like 1 megabyte of download that could cost like 1 cent or 2 cents, right? And the only practical way to process like thousands and thousands and thousands and let's say millions of these transactions that could be even like 1/10 of a cent or 1/100 of a cent are through a cryptocurrency and through this like programmable money, essentially. Like the money we have today isn't programmable, but cryptocurrency is like, it's money that you can program, like if X happens, then Y happens, and the money gets transferred from one wallet to another. And so machine-to-machine microtransactions is a really interesting use case for cryptocurrency that is still kind of emergent today, but in 5 to 10 years, it will be a huge part of the economy. It's like AI is talking to each other and exchanging information, like tons of information all the time, and kind of trippy thing to think about, but that's one kind of area where it's going to be really useful. Another one, okay, so the first, let's see, okay, there's 2 use cases that got Bitcoin really famous. The first one is the Silk Road, which was founded in 2011. Do you guys have, yeah, I'll just talk about it a little bit. It was basically an anonymous marketplace where people bought and sold anything. kind of sketchy, maybe. But basically, the first use case of Bitcoin actually being used as a currency was essentially for people to anonymously buy and sell mostly drugs, whatever, pornography, like hacking stuff, mostly illegal things on what's called the darknet. And this was like what kind of proved the concept of Bitcoin as a currency. It was like the first time it was starting to be used in commerce. The second use case was around 2011 also. And do you guys know the organization WikiLeaks? Okay, so WikiLeaks is basically an NGO that leaks government secret documents, confidential documents, and they basically have the value set that governments shouldn't have the right to hide from their citizens what's happening. And so they exist to basically inform citizens of the world about what's happening, right? So super inconvenient for governments, right, that they exist. So one day all the governments in the world got together, this was like 7 or 8 years ago, and they decided collectively to close and freeze all of the WikiLeaks bank accounts in every country, right, in the entire financial system all around the world. So from one day to the next, WikiLeaks was not able to accept donations from people that believed that it was really important to have information, right, to freedom of information. So what WikiLeaks did is they opened a Bitcoin wallet. Someone told them this. Someone was like, hey, you should probably know about this currency because it exists outside of the current financial system and it will allow you to continue to accept donations. So they did it, and then they began to immediately receive donations from all around the world. And so this is like when I was introducing the concept of financial censorship. Bitcoin is a financial censorship resistant technology, which means that basically if you have, like if you want to donate money to a cause you believe in, basically Bitcoin allows you to do that in a way that government currencies don't currently. And this is kind of one example. WikiLeaks was like a kind of the first real, well, after the Silk Road, the second real use case that got the currency famous. Okay, I'll talk about a couple more and then do questions. Smart contracts, I already mentioned. So like things like Uber, like programmable contracts that have a cryptocurrency attached to them. This one is a super like nuts and bolts practical use case that has no cryptocurrency attached to it. It's for logistics and supply chain. So this is super useful for things like the pharmaceutical industry, luxury items like super high value things like a Rolex, for example. And did you guys remember there was a crisis in China a few years ago with baby's milk where there was this batch of baby's milk that got poisoned and like a bunch of babies died? So this happened like, I can't remember what year, but essentially a company was selling counterfeit baby's milk in China, and they used some ingredient that was like toxic to make the solution cheaper, but it resulted in a real calamity. And so in response to that, there's actually a Chinese entrepreneur that came up with a project that started to track the production of any good, let's say pharmaceutical good or baby's milk or whatever, and they could track every step of the production and verify that the ingredient was still the same, and like test the ingredient or test that a certain shipment got to a certain factory at a certain time. And basically it's a way to decrease corruption, or it's a way to increase transparency along the supply chain, and that's a really useful thing that companies are using blockchain for today, is keeping track on like a distributed list of a distributed ledger, like all of the process of a supply chain. And you could say a really similar thing for governments. So this will be a while before governments agree to do this, but you could put the entire spending, the entire public spending of a government on a blockchain. And so all citizens could actually see how their tax money is being spent, and they could see the money and they could track it and track where it goes, and it would basically make corruption and theft of money really difficult. And like in countries like Central American countries where we are, it's a really big issue that public money disappears. And so if governments accept blockchain technology as an accounting system, then citizens could monitor very closely the way that the money is spent and where it actually goes, like where it ends up, because you can actually see it. So those are some like pretty practical uses. Another one that has been seeing a lot of use lately is crowdfunding. So basically, you guys are familiar with like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, donation-based crowdfunding. So now there's a new form of crowdfunding where you can launch a currency, and instead of like when people contribute money to your campaign, instead of giving them like a future gift or an IOU for a gift or something like that, you can give them basically a stake or a share. Like they're basically buying a currency from you, or let's call it a token, because it doesn't have to be currency. It could be equity, it could be a future share of profit, it could be coupons for cacao or beer. It could be a vote in a system, like you can program a token to have a vote. So you could think about a token that is both a currency and a voting mechanism, right? Like if you have, kind of like how equity works, like it gives you a vote in the system. You can imagine anything, right? You can program a token with anything, so you can really think up like a million uses for this. But entrepreneurs around the world are successfully raising money completely outside of venture capital, completely outside of like existing financial institutions, by launching a currency or launching a token, and then accepting, like basically people can pre-purchase a certain percentage of the token, and that's called a ICO, or initial coin offering. There's a new version of it called a STO. I don't want to get too technical, but that just means a security token offering, which is not that different. It's just more regulated. It's more like compliant with securities laws in mostly in the United States and Europe. And so it's becoming more and more regulated and more of kind of like a normalized thing. But basically, crowdfunding and financing for entrepreneurs and for projects is completely transforming through this method, because people are basically able to raise money in small amounts from people all around the world, whereas before, usually the way to fund a company is like you get seed funding from an angel investor or venture capitalist. So it's a very different way to raise money and start projects. So those are like some of the uses, some of the like first uses, and then some of the practical uses today.
Do that if everything's frozen for them.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. One of them is more and more organizations pay their employees in cryptocurrency. One issue with Bitcoin is that the value is volatile, and so once you have money inside of the realm of cryptocurrency, you can exchange it for other currencies. That's pretty easy. There's like very little friction if you're exchanging from one currency to the next. It takes like seconds, and it's super cheap on an exchange. If you're exchanging it to a government currency, there's a lot of friction, and it's usually difficult. So some people just pay their employees in cryptocurrency directly, and maybe an employee doesn't like to accept Bitcoin because it's volatile and it changes in value. So actually, Rafa's brother works for a company called MakerDAO, and they created a product called a stable coin, which is basically a cryptocurrency that's stable against the dollar 1-to-1. So it's like a dollar, but it's crypto. And so that's like having money, but it's like having a dollar, but it's in crypto, but the value doesn't change from one day to the next. Only changes with the dollar, right? To change it out, so you can have stable coins, you can pay people in stable cryptocurrency. To change it out, there are a number of ways to do this. So one of them I mentioned is regulated exchanges, of which this wouldn't apply to WikiLeaks, like have an account on a regulated exchange, because that's like interfacing with the banks, right? There's something called OTC, or over the counter, which is basically, okay, so there's a website called Local Bitcoins, where you can go anywhere in the world and see who can exchange Bitcoins for local currency, and you just do a trade. So you find it's peer-to-peer, right? It's people all around the world that...
Like hard cash.
Yeah, exactly. There's also Bitcoin ATMs in an increasing amount of countries. So in San Jose, Costa Rica, you could go to an ATM, send Bitcoin, and then take out colones, or US dollars. Those are two ways. You can also purchase things. So like flights you can purchase with Bitcoin. So like, for example, in a lot of countries where PayPal doesn't work, you can still have money in PayPal and buy things online. You just can't cash it out into local currency. So that's another use, is like a gift card, right?
You can buy things like
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you can buy anything on NuMundo with crypto. So basically, you could travel the world for free, or not. Sorry, you can travel the world using crypto and not have to use fiat currencies. And the way that we do this is in the back end, we can switch out any currency into US dollars. And so we can actually receive US dollars even if someone...
How do you get around like the fluctuations and things like that?
So basically, when someone pays with, let's say, Bitcoin, we can immediately convert it into a stable coin, actually, like DAI, which is basically a crypto dollar. And that can happen instantly and programmatically.
Is the explanation of a stablecoin really technically complicated? Or can you explain how they made it stable?
Each stablecoin works differently. Some of them are literally have a reserve one-to-one in US dollars in a bank account. So there's one called Tether, which in theory has every one Tether that exists, there's one US dollar in a bank account. That's one way to back it. It's just full reserve. DAI works a totally different way, and it's very unique. It's completely outside of the banking system. It's, I think, the only stablecoin I know that is not related to the banking system, but they have a reserve in Ether, and that's like it's fully inside of the crypto sphere. So they have basically a dynamic reserve where if the price of Ether goes down, the reserve increases. And that is pretty technically complex. Probably Rafa could explain it better, but basically the important part is that it's just it's pegged to the US dollar, and it's backed. There's a reserve in another currency. There's a lot of probably other creative ways you can use crypto and exchange it, but those are like some basic ones. Let's see. Oh, you can. Oh, this is a great one. I'll get into this. Is like practical, but you can have Bitcoin, and again, this is one that is connected to the banking system completely. But I have a Bitcoin debit card, which basically is a Bitcoin wallet attached to the Visa network, and so I can go anywhere. Like I can go to San Jose Airport and order coffee or order some food and pay with Visa, and it immediately converts out the Bitcoin at that minute into whatever local currency, and then the payment is across the Visa network. And so like these networks like Visa, PayPal, these are basically the competitors to Bitcoin. If you look at it that way, they're like payment networks, right? So that's like why the banks are so threatened, is because banks and like credit card processing companies, because it's like basically threatens the entire business model of the existence of these companies, PayPal, Visa, JP Morgan, etc. JP Morgan just made their own cryptocurrency, by the way. So it's
What's it
becoming
called?
mainstream pretty quickly.
What's it called?
I can't remember.
Is
Yeah.
anyone experimenting with like crypto credit? I just thought about when you said credit card.
So yeah, the question is anyone experimenting with crypto credit? So this is interesting because the very existence of Bitcoin was in response to the credit crisis. And so in the last year or two, a bunch of Wall Street people came into crypto because they could make way more money than on Wall Street. And a lot of like early hardcore crypto people really, really resent this. But yes, there are now the emergence of platforms where you can lend crypto or you can borrow against your crypto. Like you can borrow US dollars against your crypto and you can put your crypto as a collateral. So basically these kinds of financial services are coming into crypto, even though the way that Bitcoin works is like fundamentally different from the US dollar. The US dollar, in theory, and any other government currency, the government decides when they can print more. With Bitcoin, there's no human being that can decide that, and most cryptocurrencies are the same. There's like a fixed amount of supply, and so it's by its nature, it's deflationary, which means that it's like designed to go up in value over time, because if it has more use but the same amount in circulation, then the value increases. So yeah, okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about like practical stuff for just like daily use. There are, let's see, there's a really like basic fundamental thing which is private key and public key. So a private key is like your password to your wallet or like the key to your vault in the bank. And then the public key is like your email address. Or like your PayPal address, like where people can send you, or your postal address, like how people can send you funds. So your public key you give out to everyone, and then your private key you never give out to anyone, because if anyone gets your private key, basically they get all your money. So that's pretty much all there is to a wallet: a private key and a public key. And there's these terms you'll hear, which are like a cold storage wallet and then a hot wallet. And a hot wallet means it's like online, connected to the internet, which means it can be hacked. And then a cold storage wallet means that it's offline and there's no way to access the private key. It's like cash in your pocket. There's like it's not connected, and that's like the safe way to store money. So you'll hear that phrase, like a cold storage wallet and a hot wallet, and that's basically what that means. Like exchanges, like there's regularly these news about like $500 million exchange hacks. And so an exchange is basically people are putting their money into exchanges, which is kind of like what is the word? Really shiny target for hackers, right? Like a honeypot, that's the word. So yeah, an exchange is basically where you can trade cryptocurrencies between each other. And there's, like I mentioned, two kinds of exchanges. One that is much more regulated, and you change from government currency into cryptocurrency and in and out. And then another one which is crypto to crypto. And there are centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. So like a centralized exchange is like Coinbase is the most well-known one. And it's kind of like PayPal. Like it is connected to the banking system, and it's like a trusted financial institution where you like put your money in the institution and you trust them to keep it safe for you. And then a decentralized exchange is basically kind of mirrors the Bitcoin blockchain itself. It's like a open source software that people can run on their computers, and there's no company behind it. And so it also is much more difficult to regulate. And it's, let's see, and it's not custodial. So there's no one holding your funds. Like you basically send your funds into the exchange, and then you get some other funds in another currency back out of the exchange, but the exchange itself isn't holding on to any funds, if that makes sense. Because a lot of the ways that cryptocurrency is being hacked today is centralized exchanges, which is also, when you think about it, the whole point of decentralized technology is to prevent the this risk from happening. And you see it in the normal world with things like Equifax. There was just a huge hack recently where tons of information, tens of millions of Americans' information got hacked, a lot of personal information of probably some of us in this room. And that's also happening more and more, where these big centralized treasure troves of data are getting hacked. So beyond money, there's actually some really interesting use cases of blockchain technology to protect data by keeping it not in one central, easy to hack place. Okay, so there's exchanges. So basically, if you want to change your currency, you can just go on an exchange and turn, dollars into Bitcoin, Bitcoin into Ether, etc. There's the card that I talked about, the Bitcoin debit card. So that helps you interface between cryptocurrency and anywhere that Visa works, so the whole global banking system. There's merchant solutions, so anyone can accept cryptocurrency as a payment. It takes a few minutes to set up a wallet, and then people can start paying you in many currencies. And you can, the system that we use at NuMundo is called coin payments. And basically whatever currency people pay us in, we automatically convert it into a stable coin or Bitcoin immediately, and that way we don't have to deal with having so many different currencies with different values. And what else? Oh yeah, security. So this is just a little bit of useful things that are once you have a cryptocurrency wallet or an exchange account, you want to make sure that no one can hack into your account and get your information. So one resource that's really useful is called Proton Mail, which is encrypted email. And these are all free. Google Authenticator is another really good resource, which basically allows you to put a second layer of protection on top of your password, and that just makes it much harder to get into any of your accounts. And then there are encrypted chat applications that are really popular for the crypto community. So one is called Signal, and then the other is called Telegram. And there's a really interesting story of how Telegram got created. So it was made by a guy named Pavel, and Telegram is basically the social media app of the blockchain community around the world. It's I think 200 million people use it. And this is the way it started. Basically, you guys know Mark Zuckerberg? Okay, so there's a guy named Pavel, who's basically the same guy in Russia. It's the Russian Mark Zuckerberg, yeah? So he had this company called vContact, and it was the Facebook of Russia, and he had pretty much half of Russia was using this software, vContact, and he got really famous and popular, and people really liked him, and he had this crazy amount of power, because he had so much, media, right? And the government of Russia was not down with this, so they basically started to heavily monitor him and track his movements, track his communications with his employees, and basically eventually convince him by some means to give the company to another, to sell it or give it to more or less people that worked with the Russian government, because he was not really working with the Russian government. So you can imagine this same thing happening with Mark Zuckerberg in the States, right? Except Mark, I think, collaborates a lot with the authorities, right? So it's a little different. Basically, this guy Pavel made Telegram as an internal communication app, just so he could communicate with his employees in an encrypted chat application without the government being able to monitor his communications with his employees. So that's how Telegram, that's why it was built. It was never supposed to be a commercial app. And these guys have no monetization model. It's just encrypted chat. People are just talking to each other. It's free. You can download it. And they raised $2 billion through an ICO without any way to monetize Telegram. It has no monetization, which is insane, right? $2 billion for like from the crowd, right? From just people all over the world, which gives you kind of an idea of like also the popularity of the app among the crypto community. So those are just like some tools that they accompany the technology. It's good to be familiar with all these encryption tools so that you basically keep your data safe and your money safe.
There's also Keybase. You know Keybase?
No.
Keybase is another like encrypted platform, and the social movement that's forming Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate movement that started in London, that's now spreading globally. We all communicate on Keybase.
Oh, cool.
Which is end-to-end encryption, and we have various channels, and we can private message people, and it's a really easy to use platform.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Even WhatsApp offers end-to-end encryption. I mean,
but it's owned by Zuckerberg.
right. Still, I mean, in theory, he can't decipher the messages. There is end-to-end encryption. The message that goes through Zuckerberg servers is encrypted. So.
In theory, if there's no backdoor. So like with Telegram, it's pretty, like people are pretty sure there's no backdoor, but and the rumor has it that multiple governments have propositioned this guy to create a backdoor.